The first thing they took was the dock, but that was not the thing that ruined them. What ruined them was the quiet little road behind my property, the one nobody at that shiny new resort thought twice about until I put a chain across it. And if I'm being honest, even now, years later, I still do not know whether I should call what happened justice, revenge, or just a very expensive lesson in reading old paperwork before you start acting like you own the whole lake. My name is Caleb Whitaker, and I grew up on the west side of Sparrowmere Lake, a place so small most GPS apps treat it like a suggestion instead of a destination. It was the kind of town where the diner waitress knew your truck before she knew your name, where people complained about outsiders but still gave them directions, and where everybody had a story about somebody else's grandfather doing something stubborn enough to become local history. My family's little stretch of shoreline sat at the end of Pine Needle Road, which sounds charming until you have actually driven it after a week of rain and realized the road was named less for romance and more for everything stuck in your tires. We had a weathered cedar dock that reached out over the lake. Nothing fancy, no lights, no built-in benches, no ridiculous little sign that said lake life, just old boards, iron bolts, and enough repairs over the years that you could probably argue it was more memory than structure. My grandmother used to say my granddad built that dock the year he finally stopped trying to be a young man, which was her polite way of saying he hurt his back halfway through and refused to admit it. My dad kept it alive after him, every spring with a thermos of coffee, a cigar he barely smoked, and the same old toolbox that sounded like loose bones when he carried it down the hill. By the time the place became mine, after Dad passed and Mum moved closer to my sister, the dock had become less of a dock and more of a habit I did not know how to explain to people. I sat there in the mornings, sometimes fishing, usually not catching anything worth bragging about, sometimes just watching the fog move across the water like the lake was taking its time waking up. That dock was where I had my first beer, my first heartbreak, my last real conversation with my father, and more quiet arguments with God than I care to admit. So when the Silverpine Grand started going up across the lake, I noticed it, sure, but I did not panic. At first it was just survey flags and a few trucks, then men in clean hard hats standing around pointing at things like the trees had personally offended them. People in town talked, because that is what towns do when concrete arrives. Some said it would bring jobs, some said it would bring traffic, and old Everett Moss at the bait shop said rich people ruin water faster than algae, which was funny mostly because Everett had not willingly smiled since 1998. I tried to stay reasonable about it. Progress happens. Land changes hands. People with money discover quiet places and immediately start improving them until they are not quiet anymore. That is just the American way, apparently. But over the next year, the resort became less like a neighbor and more like a statement. Glass walls, black steel balconies, a private marina, stone fire pits, valet carts humming around like little electric beetles, all of it polished and perfect and completely out of place against the old pines and muddy banks of Sparrowmere. They called it rustic luxury, which is a phrase that usually means somebody paid $3,000 to make wood look like it was poor on purpose. Still, I kept to myself. I had no interest in being the cranky lake guy yelling at clouds, or in this case, yelling at a resort full of weekend executives wearing linen pants. Then came the morning I walked down with my coffee and stopped halfway through the yard because something felt wrong before I could name it. The lake was there. The fog was there. The cold air was there. But the lying in the world that had always been there, that little stretch of cedar reaching into the water, was gone. Not broken, not storm damaged. Gone. I remember standing there with my mug in my hand, coffee cooling, my brain doing that useless human thing where it tries to negotiate with reality after reality has already made up its mind. There were splinters floating near the bank, 2 posts snapped crooked in the mud, and deep tire tracks carved straight through the soft ground beside my shed. Whoever did it had come in heavy, probably at night, probably with a skid steer or some compact loader, and they had not even bothered to clean up the mess. Across the lake, Silverpine Grand was shining in the morning light, like a brochure had learned how to smirk. I drove over there that same day, not because I had a plan, but because if I stayed home looking at that empty water any longer, I was going to start talking to myself in a way that would worry the neighbors. The lobby smelled like cedar candles and money, and a young woman at the front desk gave me the kind of smile people use when they know you are not staying there. After 20 minutes, a man named Graham Voss came out, resort operations director, pressed shirt, perfect watch, hair that looked like it had a legal team. He shook my hand with 2 fingers less warmth than necessary and said, "Mr. Whitaker, I understand there is some concern about shoreline clearing." Shoreline clearing. I almost laughed, because that was a beautiful little corporate trick, turning my family's dock into landscaping. I told him that dock had been on my land for more than 50 years, and he nodded slowly like I'd just shared a charming folk tale. Then he said, "Our survey indicated the structure interfered with a visual and navigational corridor tied to our marina expansion, and because it appeared unpermitted, removal was considered necessary." I said, "You tore down my dock because it interrupted your view." His smile twitched. "Just a little," he said. "That is not how I would phrase it." I said, "I bet it is not." He folded his hands and told me they were willing to discuss a modest courtesy payment, maybe even assist with a future compliance structure if I submitted the proper request through the county. That was the moment something in me went very still. Not hot, not loud, not dramatic, just still, because I realized he did not think he had done something wrong. He thought he had handled an inconvenience. He thought I was standing there because I wanted to check. So I leaned forward and said, "Grum, my grandfather built that dock before your company knew this lake existed. My father kept it standing until his hands stopped working right. And you set machines onto my property to erase it without asking me a single question." He looked at me for a second, then said, "I appreciate the emotional attachment." Emotional attachment. That was the phrase that followed me all the way home, rattling around in my head like a loose screw. By sunset, I was standing at the shoreline again, watching those broken posts stick out of the water, and for the first time since it happened, I was not thinking about the dock. I was thinking about the tire tracks, the service road behind my shed, the delivery trucks I had seen cutting through there for months, and the old file boxes my father used to keep in the back bedroom. I did not know it yet, but that was the night the story stopped being about what they took from me and started being about what they had been using without ever bothering to understand. I spent that night in the back bedroom with a flashlight, a box cutter, and about 30 years of my father's inability to throw anything away, which, for the record, I used to make fun of him for. And that is one of those little jokes life saves until it can slap you with it later. There were tax bills, boat registrations, old insurance policies, receipts for lumber from stores that did not exist anymore, birthday cards my mother had tied together with ribbon, and enough yellowed county paperwork to make a normal man give up and go watch baseball. But I was not normal that night. I was quiet in a way that even scared me a little. I kept seeing Graham Voss across that desk, saying emotional attachment. Mike the Dock was some sad little hobby I needed to outgrow, and every time I thought about it, my hands got steadier instead of shakier. Around 2 in the morning, I found a folded survey map tucked inside an envelope marked East Boundary Access, written in my dad's blocky handwriting. I almost missed it because there was an old fishing license stuck to the front of it with coffee stains all over the corner. But when I opened it, I saw Pine Needle Road, my lot line, the old service cut behind my shed, and a narrow strip shaded in blue that ran across the back edge of my land toward the far side of the lake. Underneath was an agreement from 20-something years earlier. Back when the county was upgrading drainage and allowing temporary construction traffic around the lake, temporary access easement. That phrase looked boring enough to put a man to sleep, except it woke me up so hard I could hear my own pulse. The agreement allowed construction-related traffic to cross that strip of my land for a defined period tied to the original shoreline development phase. Not forever. Not for whoever bought property later. Not for luxury vans full of spa towels and imported tile and whatever else Silver Pine Grand had been hauling through there like the road was theirs. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th time with my finger under the words like a kid learning to read, because I did not trust myself to understand something that convenient. At sunrise I was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with the document in front of me, watching the lake turn silver through the window. It is a strange feeling. Discovering leverage. It does not feel like triumph right away. It feels like finding a loaded tool in a drawer and realizing the only adult in the room might be you. I did not call Graham. I did not storm over there. I did not post anything online with a lot of capital letters and crying emojis. Because first of all, if I am not 12, and second, the minute you turn something serious into noise, people start treating it like noise. So I drove to the county records office in Millhaven, which is a squat brick building that looks like it was designed by somebody who believed joy should be kept outside. The clerk at the counter was a woman named Darlene who had glasses on a chain and the kind of face that said she had survived 6 software updates and trusted none of them. I asked for all active access agreements attached to my parcel and the Silver Pine Development Corridor. She looked at me over the glasses and said, "You folks having a dispute?" I said, "I'm trying very hard not to." That got the smallest smile out of her. She disappeared into the back, came out with a folder, disappeared again, came back with another one. Then sat at her computer long enough that I started noticing every hum in the building. Finally, she said, "Well, that is interesting." No, when a county records clerk says that, your stomach does a little dance because government people do not use the word interesting unless something is either very wrong or very expensive. She turned the screen slightly and tapped the page. This easement expired at the end of the original improvement window. No renewal recorded. No transfer language. No active access right. I asked her to print that. She did. I asked if she could certify it. She gave me a look like maybe I was not as dumb as I seemed, then stamped it so hard the counter shook. I walked out holding that paper like it weighed 10 pounds. On the drive home, I passed the resort entrance. All stacked stone and polished signs and little flags snapping in the wind, and I saw a delivery truck turn off the main road toward the old cut behind my place. For a second I almost laughed. They were still doing it. Still rolling through my land because nobody had ever told them no, and because people like Graham usually mistake silence for permission. By noon, I had called a local attorney. Not one of those shiny billboard guys promising justice with perfect teeth, but a semi-retired land use lawyer named Marjorie Bell who worked out of an office above the pharmacy and wore cardigans like armor. She had known my father, which helped, although she still charged me, which felt fair because friendship is nice, but legal work apparently does not pay for itself with nostalgia. Marjorie read the documents, asked me exactly what happened to the dock, asked whether I had given permission for removal, asked whether anyone from Silverpine had contacted me beforehand, and the longer I answered no, the flatter her mouth became. Finally, she leaned back and said, "Caleb, they may have money, but they got sloppy." I said, "How sloppy?" She said, "Sloppy enough that you should stop talking to them without me." That was the first good thing I'd heard in 2 days. She drafted a notice that afternoon, formal but not dramatic, stating that the easement had expired, continued use constituted unauthorized access, and any further entry onto my property would be treated accordingly. Then she paused, looked at me, and said, "You understand this will make them angry?" I said, "Marjorie, they already tore down my dock. I'm not sure I'm trying to win their Christmas card list." She almost smiled, almost. 2 days later, I installed a heavy chain across the service road with a posted sign that said, "Private property, no unauthorized access." And beneath it, "Because I'm not above a little pettiness when properly motivated." I added, "All questions may be directed to counsel." I stood there for a minute after locking it, listening to the lake wind through the pines, and I swear the world felt quieter, not peaceful exactly, but balanced. The first truck came at 8:17 the next morning. Big white box truck, Silverpine delivery sticker on the windshield, driver with sunglasses and a breakfast sandwich in one hand. He stopped at the chain, leaned out, stared at it, stared at me standing by the shed with my coffee, and said, "You serious?" I raised my mug. He said, "Man, I just deliver linens." I said, "Then today you were delivering them somewhere else." I felt bad for him, honestly. He was not the enemy. Most people caught in the middle never are. But systems do not feel consequences until the ordinary people inside them have to turn the truck around. By 10, there were 2 more vehicles backed up. By noon, Grandvoss was at my gate in person, looking less like a resort executive and more like a man who had found a raccoon in his kitchen and was trying to negotiate with it. He did not smile this time. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "this access route is essential to our operations." I said, "I imagine it is." He breathed through his nose. "Slow and controlled. We've used this road for months with no issue." I said, "You also removed my dock with no issue, until there was one." His jaw tightened. He said, "We are prepared to discuss compensation for continued use." I said, "Graham, you keep trying to buy the part of the problem that makes you comfortable. The problem is not money. The problem is you treated my property like an obstacle on your map." He stepped closer to the chain. Not enough to threaten me, just enough to remind me he was used to people stepping back. I did not. For a second, we just looked at each other over that chain. Him with his polished shoes in the gravel, Me in an old flannel my sister had been trying to throw away for 5 years. Then he said, "You are creating a serious disruption for dozens of employees and guests." I said, "No, Graham. Your company created a resort that depends on land it does not control. I just noticed. That one landed." I saw it in his eyes, a flicker of something between anger and calculation. Behind him, across the lake, the Silver Pine Grand looked perfect as ever, sunlight flashing off the windows. Guests probably eating $20 pancakes and calling it quaint, but underneath that shine, something had started to shift. Deliveries were rerouted 20 minutes around the public road. Maintenance carts could not reach the marina side easily. Contractors started showing up late, and guests began asking why service vehicles were passing through the front entrance like a parade of inconvenience. Marjorie told me not to enjoy it too much. I told her I was not enjoying it. "Exactly. I was observing," she said. "That is what men say when they are enjoying it carefully." By the end of the week, Silver Pine's tone changed. First came an email from their legal department. Very stern, very long, very confident in the way people are when they hope volume can substitute for facts. Marjorie answered with 3 pages and 6 attachments. And, after that, their confidence started losing weight. Then Graham called. But I let Marjorie handle it. Then a woman named Elise Harlow, Regional Vice President of Development, requested a meeting at my property. Not at the resort, not in their polished lobby. My property. That told me more than the email did. She arrived the next afternoon in a black SUV with a driver who stayed behind the wheel and pretended not to listen. Elise was maybe 50. Sharp grey blazer, calm eyes, no wasted movement. She did not insult me by pretending this was a misunderstanding. I appreciated that. She looked at the empty place where the dock had been, then at the chain, then at me. "Mr. Whittaker," she said, "I will not defend how this was handled." I said, "That is a refreshing change of pace." Graham, standing beside her, looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Elise ignored him. She said, "We are prepared to restore the structure, compensate you for the unauthorized removal, and negotiate a formal access agreement." I asked restore how. She said, "To code, with improvements." I said, "No." Graham could not help himself. He said, "You're objecting to a better dock." I turned to him and said, "I'm objecting to you calling your version better after destroying mine." The air went still. Even Elise looked down for half a second, like she knew that one was fair. Then I told them what I wanted. The dock rebuilt as close to the original as legally possible. Cedar, same footprint, same height, no resort lights, no little plaque, no branding, no apology carved into a bench like a bad movie. A written acknowledgement that they removed it without permission. A new access agreement with clear payment, clear limits, clear hours, clear liability, and language that said if they ever touched my land again outside those terms, the road closed immediately. And one more thing. Graham had to be present when the first board went back down. He actually laughed, sharp and offended. Elise did not. She looked at him, then back at me and said, "We will review the terms." That meant no. It also meant maybe, and as they walked back to the SUV, I looked past them at the resort across the water, still glowing, still proud, still pretending nothing could reach it. And I knew the next move would decide whether this ended as a settlement or became the kind of public mess rich people spend fortunes trying to bury. The thing about people with power is that they usually know how to lose quietly before they know how to apologize honestly. And for 3 days after Elise Harlow left my driveway, Silver Pine Grand went very quiet. Not peaceful quiet, not lake quiet, but lawyer quiet. The kind where every word is probably being reviewed by 6 people in a conference room with bottled water and bad carpet. I could see the resort across the lake still operating, still glowing at night like a rich man's idea of a campfire. But the rhythm had changed. Trucks came through the front entrance now. Guests had to wait longer for carts. Maintenance crews looked irritated, and every once in a while I would catch Graham Voss standing near the marina with his phone pressed to his ear, looking across the water at my little chain like it had personally betrayed him. I did not feel victorious. That surprised me. I thought maybe I would feel some great satisfying rush, like the music would swell and I would stand on my porch sipping coffee like a hero in one of those movies where the small-town guy finally beats the corporation. But real life is quieter and a lot more awkward. Mostly I felt tired. I missed my dock. I miss being the version of myself who could walk down to the lake without wondering what someone might be planning behind a conference table. Marjorie called me on the 4th morning and said, "They are ready to settle." I asked, "Ready to settle, or ready to pretend they are doing me a favor?" She said, "Caleb, with people like this, those are often the same thing at first." The meeting happened that afternoon at my kitchen table, which I enjoyed more than I probably should have. Elise came with Graham, one attorney, and a folder thick enough to qualify as furniture. Marjorie sat beside me with her reading glasses low on her nose, calm as a church lady holding a shotgun under the hymn book. Elise opened by saying the company acknowledged that the dock had been removed without adequate notice or authorization. Marjorie cleared her throat. Elise looked at the paper, then corrected herself. "Without authorization." I looked at Graham. He was staring at the tabletop like the wood grain had insulted his mother. Then came the terms. They would rebuild the dock on the original footprint, using cedar where possible, matching the old design within current safety rules, no decorative lighting, no resort branding, no public access, no nonsense. They would pay for the work, cover legal fees, and sign a formal access agreement for the service road with strict hours, limited vehicle types, insurance requirements, monthly compensation, and immediate suspension rights if they violated the terms. It was more than fair, maybe even generous. But generosity hits different when it only arrives after inconvenience becomes expensive. Then Elise slid one final page across the table. A written acknowledgement, plain language. No poetry, no performance. Silver Pine Grand removed a privately owned structure from the Whitaker shoreline without permission. I read that sentence twice. My throat did something I did not appreciate, so I covered it by taking a sip of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. Graham still had not said a word. Maybe Elise noticed, because she turned slightly and said, "Gran will oversee coordination personally." I said, "That was not the same as what I asked." Graham looked up then. His face was tight. Elise gave him one of those executive looks that means speak now or update your resume. He took a breath and said, "I will be present when reconstruction begins." I waited. He added, "And I regret how the situation was handled." It was not much. It was stiff, polished, probably rehearsed in a bathroom mirror. But I had learned by then that getting a man like Graham Voss to say regret in your kitchen was sometimes the closest thing to a parade you were ever going to get. Work started the following week. The first morning, 2 trucks came down the public road. Not my service road, because Marjorie had made that very clear, and a small crew walked the shoreline with plans, tools, and the careful posture of men who know they are rebuilding something they should never have been sent to destroy. Graham stood there in a dark jacket and polished boots, looking wildly uncomfortable in actual dirt. I almost offered him coffee, then decided personal growth had limits. The first cedar board went down just after 9. Nobody clapped. Nobody made speeches. The hammer struck. The lake moved softly under the pilings, and for a second I saw my father there so clearly it nearly knocked the breath out of me. Not as a ghost. Nothing dramatic like that. Just memory doing what memory does. Showing up uninvited when something familiar comes back into the world. Over the next few weeks, the dock returned piece by piece. The crew asked questions I respected. Where did the old lattice sit? How far did the end extend? Did the left side always sit slightly lower? I told them yes, and they looked at me like that was a problem, so I said, "It is not a mistake. It is family engineering." One of the carpenters laughed, and for the first time since the whole thing began, the sound did not feel out of place. When they finished, I waited until everyone left. No cameras, no neighbors, no Graham, no Elise, no Marjorie standing there pretending not to be sentimental. Just me, the lake, and a rebuilt dock that looked almost exactly like the one I had lost, which is to say it looked imperfect in all the right ways. I stepped onto the first board, slowly, and it creaked. That sound hit me harder than any apology. I walked to the end and sat down the way I had sat 1,000 mornings before, elbows on my knees, hands folded, looking across at Silver Pine Grand. It was still beautiful from a distance. That was the annoying part. The glass still caught the sun. The balconies still looked elegant. The guests still drifted around with drinks in their hands, completely unaware that the whole place had nearly been brought to its knees by a missing signature, an expired access right, and one stubborn man with a chain from the hardware store. I thought I would hate it forever, but sitting there, I realized hate takes too much maintenance. What stayed with me was something stranger. Awareness. the kind you cannot unknow. Before all this, I believed peace was something a place gave you. Afterward, I understood peace as something people have to protect, sometimes quietly, sometimes legally, and sometimes with enough stubbornness to make a rich company remember where its property line ends. People in town still argue about it. Some say I did the right thing, that Silver Pine deserved every minute of disruption for treating old families like scenery. Some say I went too far, that workers and guests paid the price for decisions made by executives. Everett at the bait shop said I should have charged them double and made Graham wear waders, which is why nobody asks Everett for moral guidance. Only minnows. As for me, I still do not have a clean answer. They rebuilt the dock. They signed the agreement. They paid what they owed. But the original thing, the easy trust I had in my own little corner of the world, that never came back the same way. Maybe that is how justice works sometimes. It restores the structure, but not the innocence. So I will leave you with the question I still ask myself whenever I sit at the end of that dock and watch the resort lights come on across the water. Was I protecting what was mine? Or did I use one mistake to make an entire place suffer until they had no choice but to bend? And if someone powerful destroys something personal, then only apologizes when the consequences reach their wallet, is that real accountability? Or just good business wearing nicer clothes? Tell me what you think in the comments, because I genuinely want to know where you would draw the line. Was Caleb right to shut down the road and force the resort to rebuild what they erased? Or should he have taken the money and moved on? And if this happened in your town, to your family, on your land, what would justice look like to you?